I actually bought my first building in Hoboken in 2004, December of 2004, which was it's a building on 12th and Willow. And I did a conversion of that building, and I bought another building on 6th and Madison in December of '05. There are 10 units in the building. 4 of them were still occupied when I purchased the building by tenants, previous tenants, and 6 units were vacant. The 4 tenants were, again, they were governed by the rent control laws in Hoboken. 2 of the rents were just over $400.
Wow.
2 of the rents were around $700. When I purchased the building, the rules with the rent control in the rent control administration were that you cannot get a calculation as a buyer. So you cannot get what's called a legal rent calculation as a buyer. So the only thing that you can do is do due diligence, go through the files, and come up with the calculation based on the way the property, was registered over the years. So there's no way to really get an exact number. Okay, so the rents looked about right. I mean, $400 and change and $700. I mean,
pretty low.
Right. I mean, and looking at the registrations, it looked like those numbers were certainly within range. So in January of 2008, I actually may have started a little bit before that, but essentially in January 2008, for all intents and purposes, one of my tenants did challenge their rent. The Rent Control Administration came back with a legal rent calculation of, they were paying $700, approximately $700 a month. They came back with a legal rent calculation of $289 a month. They arrived at that figure by going back to the first registration that was on file, which in my case was 1981, and just using that as a base rent for the property, and adding a CPI index for every year after 1981. What they didn't do, which is what they had always done in the past, was they didn't add a 25% increase when the tenancy changed.
So once this $289 was calculated, what happens then? You immediately reduce the rent from $700 to $289, or what happens?
They hold you responsible for the entire tenancy. So in my case, since she was in there for 13 or 14, whatever it was, 15 years, it was a $78,000 overpayment, which, unless you have $78,000 sitting in the bank, you can't really pay. Nor do you think it's really unfair, because why would you ever have to pay an overpayment for money that you didn't receive? Superior Court not only ruled that I was responsible for the entire tenancy, even though I only owned the building for 2 years, but they also ruled that there was consumer fraud. So there would be treble damages for the years that I owned the building. So not only am I being punished for all prior owners' mistakes, or the mistake of the Rent Control Board in this case, but I'm also being punished for being held accountable for knowingly charging a rent that was not legal, when you can't get a legal rent calculation in the city as an owner. So that was treble damages for the 2 years that I owned it, which also, that means that you have to pay their attorney's fees. And the attorneys have made a business out of it, where they are now, soliciting tenants. I had to file a hardship on the apartment, which is there's a process and procedures that are set up in Hoboken where you can apply for a hardship on an apartment to, like you know, if you're not sustaining the expenses and the mortgage expense of the unit, you can ask the rent control board, the same board that made it $289 a month. You can ask them for a hardship increase.
And you asked them that?
Yes.
And
it was granted.
it was granted, so they increased it to what?
It's actually around $1,700 a month.